Part 14. On the bridge, Lambert was amusing Jones the cat with some string. The string supposedly was on board solely for Jones' enjoyment, but the cat knew better. It was occasionally incumbent on him to entertain the humans. They seemed to derive considerable pleasure from his poking and swatting at the white cord as they manipulated it in their clumsy great paws. Lambert called the game Cat's Cradle. Jones called it People's Cradle. He was a very conscientious cat and did his best to keep the navigators smiling. They were so solemn sometimes. It was a difficult job for a cat. But Jones was conscientious. He continued to work at pleasing the human, thinking of food and warm, fat mice. "What do you think?" Brett glanced out from beneath the overhang, eyed his colleague. Parker adjusted a control, wiped sweat from his forehead. "Almost. Another half a degree and we'll be finished. Maybe that'll satisfy Ripley." The engineering tech made a rude noise. "Didn't you know? Ripley can't be satisfied." Pinging sounds came from behind the intake screen he was working on. Parker glanced at the silent intercom speaker and grunted a reply. "If we don't get full shares after this, I'll lodge a complaint. We've earned double pay, probably qualified for hazard as well. This time the company had better make it worth our while, or we'll go to the guild. No messing around anymore." "Right," snapped Brett. A hand extended outward from inside the tube where the screen was secured. "Number 3 sealer ought to do it." Parker fished around in a neatly labelled but filthy plastic case, handed up a tiny green square stenciled over in green and red, and glared at the inoffensive intercom. The rhythm was primitive, unsophisticated, and the recording had lost brilliance with age and much use. But Dallas lay back and absorbed the music as though he were present at the ancient recording session. One foot tapped silently, in unthinking podal counterpoint to the melody. The communicator beeped for attention. It did so 3 times before catching the captain's notice. Letting out a resigned sigh, he reached out and shut off the music, then flipped the acknowledge switch for the comm. "Dallas here. Ash, I think you should have a look at Kane. Something's happened." Dallas swung his legs off the lounge, sat up quickly. Ash didn't sound worried, which was encouraging. He did sound confused, which was not. "Serious? Interesting. I'll be right there." He stood and threw the final cutoff on the tape machine, reluctantly saw the green light on its flank wink out. Ash had said interesting. That could mean a host of things, not necessarily good, had occurred. He found some relief in the knowledge that Ash would have said something very different if Kane had already expired. Which meant that the exec was still alive, but in an interesting condition. As it turned out, Ash wasn't even referring to Kane. His call had been prompted by the condition of something else. Dallas found the science officer in the corridor outside the infirmary, his nose pressed to the glass. He was staring in, looked around as the captain approached. "What's going on?" Ripley had suddenly appeared at the other end of the corridor. Her gaze switched rapidly from Ash to Dallas, back again. "I heard over an open monitor." "Listening in?" Dallas eyed her curiously. She made a face. "Nothing else to do on this boat. Why, you object?" "No, just curious." He looked through the thick glass into the infirmary, spoke to Ash when no great revelation manifested itself. "Well?" "Kane." The science officer pointed. "Look closely at him, all of him." Dallas stared, squinted, then noticed what Ash was talking about, or rather, he didn't notice it. "It's gone." A fast inspection of the infirmary showed no sign of the alien. Kane remained motionless on the medical platform. His chest rose and fell steadily. He seemed to be breathing normally and without effort, despite the absence of the alien. Lingering inspection showed what looked to be tiny black dots scattered around the rim of his face. "Has it planted something on him?" Dallas tried to shy away from the repulsive thought. "No." Ash spoke positively, and Dallas was willing to believe him. He had to believe him. Anyway, the personnel dossiers said that the science officer's vision was the sharpest on board. "They're indentations, not rises. I'd guess they're sucker marks." Ash paused, added, "Those aside, Kane appears undamaged by the experience." "Which may not be over yet," Ripley put in. "The door is sealed tight. It must still be in there." She sounded confident, but it was a cover for her real feelings. The thought of the spidery hand shape with its glazed, unblinking eye scrabbling about underfoot frightened her more than she dared show. "We can't open the door," Ash said thoughtfully. "We don't want to let it out. The last thing we want to do is give it the run of the ship." "I couldn't agree more." Ripley was scanning the infirmary floor, saw only bright metal and paint. "We can't grab it or kill it from a distance. So where does that leave us?" "When we tried to remove it from Kane's face," Dallas said, "we cut it, injured it. Maybe if we didn't threaten it too overtly, it wouldn't offer resistance. Maybe we can just pick it up." Visions of spectacular company commendations, perhaps a promotion, certainly a bonus, swirled through his head. Then he again noticed the unconscious form of Kane and felt guilty. Ripley was still shuddering at the thought. "You can try picking it up. I'll watch the door." "I think it's a worthwhile idea." Ash was moving away from the glass. "It's an invaluable specimen. We should certainly make an attempt to capture it alive and intact." He touched the switch controlling the door. The infirmary was a good place to try to hunt down the intruder. It was double-walled, and save for the airlocks, it was the tightest compartment on the Nostromo. The door slid back slightly. Ash looked to Dallas, who nodded. Again, the control was touched, and the door moved another few centimeters. Now it was open enough for a man to slip through. Dallas went in first, followed cautiously by Ripley. Ash entered last, quickly hit the stud, shutting the door behind them. They stood close together in front of the door, scanning the room. Still no sign of the alien. Dallas pursed his lips, blew a sharp whistle. That failed to stir the creature, but it did make Ripley giggle a bit unsteadily. Keeping his eyes on the hidden places, Dallas started towards an open cabinet. It would make an excellent hiding place. But close inspection of the interior showed only medical supplies, neatly arranged and undisturbed. If they were going to try to trap the creature with something other than their hands, they needed something solid. Dallas chose the first suitably sized object he saw, a stainless steel alloy tray. As he turned to continue the stalk, he was quite aware that if the creature felt sufficiently threatened, it could melt its way through the tray as easily and effortlessly as it could Dallas's hands. But the wait was comforting. Ash was inspecting the far corner of the infirmary. Ripley grew bored standing next to the door. She walked in and looked beneath the platform holding Kane, thinking the creature may have attached itself to the underside. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready to throw her clear at the first sight of the tiny invader. She wasn't disappointed when the underside of the platform proved to be unoccupied. Straightening, she considered where to search next. She brushed against a bulkhead. Something solid and unyielding landed on her shoulder. Her head jerked around, and she found herself staring at long skeletal fingers and a dull grey cabochon of an eye. Somehow she got out a single scream. Her muscles spasmed and she twisted awkwardly. As she did so, the creature tumbled heavily to the deck. It lay motionless. Dallas and Ash had come running at her scream. Now the three of them stood gazing at the motionless shape lying among them. The fingers were clenched tight, uncannily like the hand of a dead man, which it still resembled more closely than anything else. Only the extra fingers, the tail, and the dull, lidless eye broke the illusion. Ripley's right hand rested on the shoulder where the thing had landed. She was gulping air rather than inhaling it, the adrenaline slowly leaking from her system. She could still feel the alien's weight on her. She extended a booted foot, prodded the hand shape. It didn't move or resist. In addition to the dullness of the single eye, its leathery skin looked shrunken and dry. She nudged it with her foot again, turning it over. The tube lay limply against the palm, almost completely retracted. "I think it's dead." Dallas studied the unanticipated corpse a moment longer, then glanced at Ripley. "You okay?" Tongue and larynx were forced into action. "Yeah, it didn't do anything. I think it was long dead before it fell on me." She walked to the open cabinet and selected a long metal forceps. A touch on the curled fingers failed to elicit any reaction, as did a poke at the eye. Dallas held out the tray. Using the forceps, she maneuvered the petrified alien into it, quickly flipped shut the gleaming lid. They moved to a nearby table. The alien was carefully removed from the tray and placed on the flat surface. Ash turned a bright light on it. The illumination intensified the ghastly pallor of the thing. He chose a small probe, pushed and prodded the unresisting form. "Look at those suckers." He used the probe to indicate the series of small, deep holes lining the inside of the creature's palm. They extended completely around it. No wonder we couldn't get it off him. Between these, the fingers, and that tail it wrapped around his neck. "Where's its mouth?" Dallas had to force his gaze away from the single eye. Even in death, the dull orb possessed a sort of hypnotic attraction. Must be this tube-like organ, up in here. The thing had it down his throat, but it never showed any sign of feeding. Ash used the probe to turn the corpse over onto its back. He got a grip on the tube with the forceps, partly pulled it out of the palm. As he extracted more of the tube, it changed colour to match the rest of the body. "It's hardening as soon as it contacts the air." Ash moved the tiny form over to a scanner, slipped it underneath the lens, and adjusted controls. Numbers and words appeared on tiny screens when he depressed a certain button. That's all, he finally informed them. It's over. It's dead. No life signs whatsoever. We may not know much about it, but it's not so alien you can't determine whether it's alive or not. Ripley's shoulder tingled. Good. Let's get rid of it. Ash looked at her in disbelief. You're joking, of course. Very funny. She shook her head. Like hell I am. But this has to go back. Ash sounded almost excited. This is the first contact with a creature like this. There's nothing like it on any of the tapes, not even in the hypotheticals. All kinds of tests should be run on it. Fine, she said. So run your tests and then we'll get rid of it. No. It requires the facilities of a completely equipped biology lab. I can only record the slightest details of construction and composition. I can't begin to guess at such critical things as its evolutionary history. We can't dump one of the greatest xenological discoveries of the past decade out the lock like a piece of common garbage. I protest, personally and in my capacity as science officer. Kane would do the same. That thing bled acid, nearly bored a hole right through the ship. She nodded towards it. God knows what it might do now that it's dead. It hasn't done anything, Ash countered. The acidic fluid is probably absorbed into the dead cells and has been rendered inert. It hasn't done a thing. Not yet. Ash turned an imploring gaze on Dallas. It has not moved nor resisted in any way when we prodded it at all, even in its eye. The scanner insists it's dead, and I think it's safe to assume it's not a zombie. Dallas, we have to keep this specimen. When Dallas didn't respond, Ash continued. For one thing, if we can't pull Kane out of his coma, the medical team that treats him will need to have the creature that induced the condition. Throw it away, and we might be throwing away the secret to reviving Kane. Dallas finally spoke. You're the science officer. It's your department, your decision. Then it's made. Ash bestowed a fond look on his acquisition. I'll seal it in a stasis tube. That'll arrest any possibility of revivication. We can handle it. That's what Kane probably thought. Ripley muttered. Dallas glared at her and she looked away. That takes care of the monster's future, I guess. She gestured at the medical platform. What about Kane? Ash turned to face the pallet. After a brief examination of the exec and careful study of his sucker-marked face, the science officer activated several instruments on the medical console. The autodoc made noises and readouts began to appear. He's running a fever. Bad? No, nothing his system can't handle. The machine will bring his temperature down. He's still unconscious. We can see that. Ash glanced back at the bitter Ripley. Not necessarily. He could be sleeping, which would be different. Ripley started to reply, was cut off by an angry Dallas. You two stop your bickering. As if he didn't have enough to worry about, now he had to deal with tension between crewmates. Considering the mental pressure they'd all been under recently, such conflicts were to be expected, but he'd tolerate only the minimum necessary to relieve it. Open antagonism was something to be avoided at all costs. He had no time to deal with congealing cliques. To get Ripley's mind off Ash and vice versa, he turned the conversation back to Kane. Unconscious and a slight fever. Anything else? Ash studied readouts. Nothing that shows here. His vital signs continue strong. Long-term prognosis. The science officer looked hesitant. I'm not a medical officer. The Nostromo isn't big enough to rate one. Or important enough, I know that, but you're the closest thing we've got. I just want your opinion. It's not going into the log, and I certainly won't hold you to it. Hell, I can't hold you to it. His gaze travelled back down to Kane, shipmate and friend. I don't want to appear unduly optimistic, Ash said slowly. But, based on his present condition and on what the monitors tell me, I'd say he may make it. Dallas grinned, nodded slowly. Good enough. Can't ask for more than that. I hope you're right, Ripley added. We disagree on some things, but this time I pray to God you're right. Ash shrugged. I wish I could do more for him, but, as I said, I'm not trained for it. It's up to the auto-doc. Right now, I'm getting back some mighty peculiar readings, but there's no precedent for the machine to attack from. All we can do is wait until it figures out what the alien did to him. Then it can prescribe and commence treatment. He looked suddenly disappointed. I wish I was medically qualified. I don't like waiting on machines. Ripley looked surprised. That's the first time I ever heard you say anything disparaging about a machine, Ash. No machine is perfect. They ought to be more flexible. We need a complete hospital in here, not just this little auto-doc. It's not designed to cope with anything like this. Well, this alien. The problem may be beyond its capability. Like any machine, it's only as effective as the information programmed into it. I just wish I knew more medicine. This is also, Ripley went on, the first time I've ever heard you express feelings of inadequacy. If you know less than everything, you always feel inadequate. I don't see how you could feel otherwise. He looked back down at Kane. That feeling is magnified when the universe confronts you with something utterly beyond your experience. I don't have the knowledge to cope properly, and it makes me feel helpless. Handling the forceps carefully, he lifted the alien by 2 of its fingers and transferred it to a large, transparent vial. He touched a control set into the vial's stopper, sealed the vial shut. A yellow glow filled the tube. Ripley had watched the procedure intently. She half expected the creature to suddenly melt its way out of the stasis tube and come clutching for them all. Finally convinced that it could no longer threaten her, except in nightmares, she turned and headed for the infirmary exit. I don't know about the rest of you, she said back over her shoulder, but I could do with some coffee. Good thought. Dallas glanced at Ash. You be okay in here by yourself? You mean alone with that? He jerked a thumb in the direction of the sealed container and grinned. I'm a scientist. Things like that heighten my curiosity, not my pulse rate. I'll be fine, thanks. If anything develops, or if Kane's condition shows hints of changing, I'll buzz you immediately. Deal. He looked back to the waiting Ripley. Let's go find that coffee. The infirmary door slid tightly shut behind them, and they started back towards the bridge, leaving the auto-doc to work on Kane, and Ash to work on the auto-doc.